Ben had always found peace in the quiet hills of Greyfield. The small frontier colony tucked away in the rugged wilderness was where he called home. The people who lived there were few, mostly hunters and farmers, all working together to survive. Ben was one of them, living a simple life with nothing but the wild and his thoughts. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That afternoon, as Ben tked up the familiar path through the trees, a strange sight caught his attention. The sky, usually clear and peaceful, had suddenly turned an eerie shade of orange. A streak of fire brighter than any meteor he had ever seen tore across the sky. His heart raced. It wasn't natural. Whatever it was coming fast, and it was headed straight for the hills. Without thinking, Ben dropped his gear and sprinted toward the place where the object had fallen. His feet pounded the dirt trail as he climbed higher, cutting through the dense forest. The air smelled different, thicker, almost metallic. As he neared the crash site, when Ben reached the clearing, he stopped dead in his tracks. The wreckage was unlike anything he had ever seen. A sleek silver pod lay cracked open on the ground. It glowed faintly, its edges shared from the fiery descent. Ben's instincts kicked in. He knew this wasn't just any spaceship. It was something far more advanced, something far more dangerous. The smell of burning metal still hung in the air, but it was faint. The pod had already cooled. Then cautiously approached every step, measured, his eyes scanning for danger. He had heard stories of travelers from other planets, of strange creatures who visited their world, but he had never thought he would see one. Now here it was, a real-life mystery sitting right in front of him. It didn't take long for Ben to find her lying next to the wreckage. Hidden partly behind some rocks was a woman. No, not a woman. Ben froze. Her skin wasn't like his. It was pale, almost violet in the light of the setting sun. Her long hair shimmered silver, and her features were delicate, almost ethereal. She appeared unconscious, breathing shallowly, her body battered from the crash. Then rushed to her side, his heart pounding with both fear and curiosity. He knelt down beside her, checking for a pulse. Her skin was cool to the touch, but there was a faint heartbeat. Slow and steady relief washed over him, but only for a moment. The woman was injured badly. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised, but what caught Ben's attention was the strange glowing stone clutched in her hand. It looked like nothing he had ever seen. With urgency, Ben gently moved the stone from her grasp and checked her injuries. It wasn't pretty. A deep gash ran along her side, and her arm seemed to be twisted in an unnatural way. He knew he had to act fast. He couldn't leave her here alone, especially not with no one around for miles. She might not survive the night if he didn't help her. Ben's first instinct was to call for help, but there was no one for miles, and he had no way of reaching the colony from here. The nearest medic was days away by foot. He didn't have much of a choice. Carefully, he lifted the woman into his arms, her body light despite the injuries. As he made his way back down the path toward his cabin, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the forest. Ben's mind raced. What had he found? Who was she? And more importantly, why was she here? The questions piled up, but for now, all he could do was get her to safety. He could figure the rest out later. Ben didn't know it yet, but this strange encounter would change his life forever. He was about to learn that sometimes the wild holds more than just animals and trees. It hides things that come from beyond the stars. Then carefully carried the strange woman through the forest, his heart racing. The weight of her body in his arms felt heavier with each step, but he didn't dare stop. The evening sky darkened above him, the stars barely visible through the thick canopy of trees. The cool night air made the forest feel even more mysterious. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot made Ben wonder if he was being watched. He reached his cabin after what felt like an eternity, his legs aching from the long walk. The small wooden structure was nestled between towering trees, hidden from the world. Ben had built it himself using the tools he had crafted by hand. It wasn't much, but it was home. Inside the cabin was simple, just a fireplace, a small table, a few chairs, and a single bed. The walls were decorated with animal pelts and old maps of the surrounding forests. It was a place of peace, far from the troubles of the colony, but now it felt Different, the presence of the woman, an alien from the stars, had changed the stillness of his home forever. Ben gently placed her on the bed, feeling a sense of urgency. He moved quickly to grab his medical kit, trying not to panic. He had patched up his own wounds countless times, but this was different. The woman wasn't like anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was soft, almost glowing under the cabin's dim light. Her face, though bruised, was beautiful in a way that felt otherworldly. He cleaned her wounds with careful hands, bandaging the deep gash on her side. She barely moved, but every now and then she let out a soft groan, her eyes flickering open. Ben hesitated, unsure of what to do next. She needed rest, but he also needed answers. Who was she? What had happened to her? He sat beside her, watching her breathe, his mind racing with questions. As the minutes passed, the silence grew louder. It was then that he noticed something odd. The stone she had been holding was now glowing faintly on the table beside her. The light was soft but steady, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ben leaned forward, curiosity getting the best of him. He reached out to touch the stone, but as his fingers grazed it, a strange feeling washed over him. It was warm, almost alive, and Ben quickly pulled his hand away. A deep, calming voice echoed in his mind, "Do not fear, I mean you no harm." Ben blinked, looking around the room. The voice hadn't come from anywhere, yet it felt so real. He looked back at the woman, who was still unconscious, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Had she spoken to him somehow, or was it something else? The stone began to glow brighter, and this time Ben didn't pull away. He felt a strange pull, a connection that he couldn't explain. The voice returned softer, "Now you have helped me, I will repay you. My people, they will come for me." The words seemed to carry a weight, but Ben couldn't understand them fully. It was like the voice spoke directly into his thoughts, bypassing his ears altogether. He sat back, trying to process what had just happened. Minutes turned into hours. The woman, who had been so still, finally stirred. Her violet eyes opened slowly, her gaze unfocused at first. Ben held his breath, waiting for her to speak. She blinked a few times and then her lips parted. "Thank you," she said in a soft voice, her words slow and heavy, like she was still fighting to wake up. Her accent was unfamiliar, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in her tone. Then nodded, unsure of what to say. "You're welcome," he replied quietly. "You've been hurt. You crashed near here. I found you." The woman's eyes softened, and a faint smile touched her lips. "I am Mira," she said. I am not from this world." Ben didn't know what to say to that. He had heard rumors about aliens, about visitors from other planets, but he had never believed any of it. He certainly hadn't expected to find one lying unconscious in his cabin, but there was no denying it now. She was real. Mira was real. As the night stretched on, Mira's strength slowly returned. Her eyes became clearer, her breathing steadier. She seemed to be absorbing her surroundings, taking in the small cabin. "The strange man who had saved her life, I owe you much," she said quietly, her gaze locking with his. "You have given me your kindness, I will not forget this." Then could only stare at her, a mix of awe and confusion filling him. What had he gotten himself into, and what would happen next? The days that followed Mira's recovery were strange. Ben had always been used to the quiet isolation of the hills, but now every corner of his small cabin felt different. It wasn't just the strange presence of an alien woman, there was something more, something he couldn't explain. It was as if the very air in the room had shifted, filled with mystery and wonder. Mira had quickly regained her strength, though she still wasn't fully recovered. Her violet skin had taken on a healthy glow again, and the bruises that marred her face and arms had begun to fade. She moved with a kind of grace that Ben had never seen before, effortless and fluid, like she was made to belong to the stars. But despite her growing strength, Mira remained distant. She hadn't shared much about herself, only that she was from a distant planet far beyond Ben's understanding. She said that her people were explorers, peaceful travelers who wandered the stars, learning about new worlds and cultures, but something had gone wrong. Her ship had been attacked and she had barely escaped with her life each day. Mira tried to explain more about herself and her people, but the language barrier was a problem. She didn't speak Terran very well, and Ben's knowledge of foreign languages was limited to a few phrases from old books at first. Their conversations were awkward, full of miscommunication and silence, but Mira was patient, using a glowing stone she carried to help translate her words into something Ben could understand. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mira sat by the fire, her hands moving slowly over the stone in her lap. The warmth of the flames cast soft shadows on her face, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought, then watched her from across the room, curiosity bubbling up inside him. He had questions, so many questions, but he didn't know how to ask. Mira's voice broke the silence. My people, we have lived among the stars for so long, she began, her words slow but clear. We have learned much, but we have also faced dangers. Not all who travel the stars are kind. Then leaned forward, intrigued. Dangers? What do you mean? Mira's violet eyes met his, and for a brief moment Ben saw something flicker behind them, a kind of sorrow. The Drek, she said, her voice quiet, they are hunters. They seek out those who are different, those who do not belong. They do not understand peace, only power. Ben felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard stories about invaders from the stars, creatures who destroyed whole civilizations, but he never imagined it could be true. Now Mira was telling him she was being hunted by these Trek. I'm sorry, Ben said softly, unsure of what else to say. He had never faced anything like that before. He was just a simple hunter, used to tracking animals and surviving off the land. He wasn't prepared for this. Mira shook her head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. You have already helped me more than you know, Ben, she said. By saving me you have already shown kindness. In my culture we call this bond heartkin, a connection formed in times of danger and trust. Ben blinked in surprise. Heartkin, the words didn't fully make sense to him, but the way Mira said them with such sincerity made him feel something deep inside. It was as if he was meant to protect her, as if their fates were somehow tied together. You mean we are connected? Ben asked, his voice hesitant. Mira nodded, her expression serious. Yes, in my people's ways those who form such bonds are never truly apart. We are linked not just by blood, but by spirit. Ben sat back, trying to process what she had just said. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. He had always been a solitary person, content to live his life alone in the hills, but now his world had been turned upside down. There was no going back to the way things were before Mira had appeared in his life, and the Drek. Ben asked, how do we stop them? Mira's gaze darkened, and for the first time Ben saw fear in her eyes. The Dre are relentless, they will come for me again no matter where I go. But I will not face them alone. I cannot. Ben felt a surge of determination. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: Mira wasn't just an alien from another planet. She was someone he needed to protect, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. He stood up, feeling the weight of the promise he was about to make. Then we'll fight them, he said, his voice steady. We'll fight them together. Mira's eyes softened, and for the first time Ben saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. Thank you, Ben, I knew you would understand. The next few days passed quietly, but Ben's mind was far from calm. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something dangerous. Mira had warned him that the Dre were relentless hunters, but how long could they stay hidden in the hills? They had to be ready. Each evening they spent hours preparing. Ben showed Mira how to set traps in the woods, how to gather food from the forest, and how to move quietly through the trees. She was quick to learn, her senses sharper than his. In many ways her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and she seemed to hear every sound in the forest, even the softest rustle of leaves, or the distant howl of a predator. Vin had never met anyone like her. Still, despite their preparation, Ben felt the tension growing. He hadn't seen any signs of the Dre yet, but he knew they were out there. The wilderness wasn't as safe as it used to be. He kept a watchful eye Scanning the treetops and the trails, Mira, too, seemed on edge. Her quiet strength had started to fade, replaced by a nervous energy. One afternoon, as Ben ventured into the woods to check the traps, he noticed something unusual. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. It wasn't the usual scent of pine and earth. This had a strange metallic tang, like something had been disturbed. He paused, listening carefully. His heart skipped a beat when he heard it, a faint whisper like voices carried on the wind. Vin's instincts kicked in. He moved quickly, taking cover behind a large boulder. He peered around it and saw what had set his nerves on edge, a figure in the distance moving slowly through the trees. The figure was tall, with a dark cloak that blended with the shadows. Ben could just make out the shape of a long, curved weapon strapped to the figure's back. He knew immediately that it wasn't a local hunter. This was someone or something else. Ben's mind raced. The Dray, he was sure of it now. They had come. He stayed hidden, watching the figure carefully. The Dray were known to be skilled trackers, masters of stealth. Ben had heard stories of their abilities, how they could find anyone, anywhere, no matter how well they hid. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized that they were getting closer. His cabin, his home, was only a few miles away. Mira was there. She was in danger. He had to warn her. Ben wasted no time. He moved swiftly through the forest, keeping low to the ground and staying as quiet as possible. Every step felt like a lifetime. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees whispering as if they knew what was coming. His breath quickened as the cabin came into sight. When he reached the clearing, he saw Mira standing by the fire pit, her back to him. She was looking at something in the distance. Her eyes narrowed. Ben hesitated for a moment, wondering if she could sense the danger too. But there was no time for hesitation. Mira, he called out in a harsh whisper. She turned quickly, her eyes wide with concern. What's wrong? She asked, her voice filled with tension. The Drek, Ben said, his voice low. They are here. They found us. Mira's face hardened, her expression fierce. I knew this day would come, she said quietly, but Ben could see the fear behind her words. It was real. She wasn't invincible. We need to move now, Ben urged, his heart racing. They'll be here any minute. Mira nodded, already shifting into action. She grabbed the glowing stone from the table and tucked it into a small pouch at her side. Her movements were quick and decisive, as though she had done this many times before, but Ben could see the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She was no longer the calm, otherworldly woman who had arrived in his life. She was a warrior, and the Dray were coming for her. Where do we go? Ben asked, looking around. The forest was dense, but there were only so many places they could hide. His cabin was no longer safe. There's a cave to the north, Mira said. It's hidden deep in the hills. If we can get there before they track us, we might be able to lose them. Ben nodded, his mind already planning their route. The cave was far, but it was their best chance. Let's go. Together they sprinted into the woods, the sound of their footsteps barely making a sound on the forest floor. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent Ben's heart into his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Drek were already behind them, tracking their every move. But Mira stayed focused, leading the way, with her sharp senses guiding them. The forest grew darker as they moved deeper into the trees. Ben couldn't tell how much time had passed, but he knew they couldn't afford to stop. The Dray were coming, and they couldn't afford to be caught. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Ben's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as he followed Mira through the thick trees. Every sound felt louder now, the crunch of leaves beneath their boots, the occasional snap of a twig. His mind raced with thoughts of the Dray. How close were they? Were they being followed? Mira moved ahead with purpose, her eyes scanning the shadows between the trees, her every step measured and deliberate. She didn't seem tired, even though they had been running for what felt like hours. Ben, on the other hand, could feel his legs growing heavy, his lungs burning for air, but there was no time to rest. Not now. Then had never known fear like this. The Dray were a legend, a whispered nightmare that hunters in the colony spoke of in hushed tones. They were supposed to be the stuff of stories, distant threats from the stars, but now Ben knew the truth. The Drek were real. And they were hunting Mira. "We're close," Mira whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. She stopped for a moment, crouching low, her head tilted as if listening for something. Ben stopped too, trying to steady his breathing. He glanced around, his hand instinctively going to the small hunting knife at his belt. It wouldn't do much against the Drek, but it was the only weapon he had. Mira's violet eyes flickered with something, an intensity that Ben hadn't seen before. She was a warrior at heart, ready to face whatever was coming, but there was something in her expression, something that told him she wasn't sure they could escape. The Dre were relentless, and Mira was no ordinary woman. She was from another world, and that alone made her a target. "We'll be safe in the cave," Mira said, her voice steady. "It's hidden well. The Dre won't find us if we reach it in time." Ben nodded, though doubt nodded at him. Time, that was their enemy. The longer they waited, the closer to Dre got. He had to trust Mira. She knew this world in ways he didn't, and her strength had already kept them alive. But how long could they outrun the Drek? A faint sound reached Ben's ears, soft footsteps, barely noticeable. His heart skipped a beat. He held his breath and looked around, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. Then he saw it, a dark figure moving between the trees, its silhouette just visible in the fading light. "They are here," Ben muttered, his voice tight with fear. Mira's eyes flashed, and she grabbed his arm, pulling him down into a crouch. They quickly moved behind a thick cluster of bushes, blending into the shadows. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. As the figure drew closer, he could hear the soft rustle of the Dre's cloak as it moved, the faint hum of its equipment. Ben's mind raced. How many were there? Had they been spotted? The Dre moved in packs, and the last thing they needed was to face them head on. "Stay still," Mira whispered, her grip tightening on his arm. Her body was tense like a coiled spring, ready to strike at any moment. Ben watched the figure move past them, its head turning slightly as it searching. The Dre seemed to be sniffing the air the way a predator does when it's on the hunt. Ben held his breath, praying they wouldn't be noticed. The figure stopped for a moment, then turned and continued its path. It was as if it knew they were nearby, but hadn't quite pinpointed their exact location. Then exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. "They are searching," Mira said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet urgency. "They'll move through here until they find us. We need to keep moving." Ben nodded, though his mind was still racing. They couldn't keep running forever. Eventually the Drek would catch up. They would find them. "Can you lead them off the trail?" Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to slow them down." Mira's eyes flickered with something, perhaps recognition of the danger, perhaps understanding of what needed to be done. "I can," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I'll distract them." Ben looked at her, his heart pounding. "No, Mira, I can't let you do that." Mira gave him a sharp look. "You can't stop them alone, but I can keep them occupied long enough for you to reach the cave." Before Ben could argue, she slipped into the shadows, her movements swift and silent. Ben stayed frozen for a moment, watching her disappear into the trees. The sound of her footsteps quickly faded into the distance, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His heart ached. Mira was risking everything to protect him, to give him a chance at survival. He had to survive for her. Then swallowed hard and turned to move toward the cave. The path ahead was still long, but he couldn't waste any more time. Mira was depending on him. Then moved quickly through the forest, his thoughts clouded with worry for Mira. The sound of her footsteps fading into the distance was like a constant echo in his mind, a reminder that she was out there facing the Drake alone. He couldn't stop thinking about how dangerous the situation had become. His heart was heavy with the weight of the decision she had made, but he had no choice now but to keep moving forward. The cave was still a good distance away. Ben had marked the path in his mind, knowing the best route through the thick trees and the rocky hills. His legs burned with each step, but he forced himself to keep going. He couldn't fail now, not when Mira was sacrificing so much to keep him safe. As he pushed through the underbrush, Ben's mind kept drifting back to the Drek he had seen their kind only once before, and it had been enough. They were ruthless hunters. Cold and efficient, the way they moved, the way they hunted, it was like they were born for it. They didn't care about anything but their prey, and now Mira was their prey. She wasn't just a stranger from another world to them, she was something more, something they needed to capture. Ben shook his head, trying to focus on the path ahead. He couldn't afford to let his thoughts get the better of him. He had to reach the cave, it was their only chance. The dense forest began to thin out. As he climbed higher into the hills, the trees grew smaller, and the ground became more rocky. Ben paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and listening carefully. He hadn't heard any sounds of pursuit, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The Dray were skilled trackers, they could be anywhere, blending into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly a sharp noise broke the silence. A twig snapped underfoot, and Ben froze. His heart skipped a beat, as he crouched low, his hand on the hunting knife. At his side he looked around quickly, searching for any sign of movement. The sound came again, closer this time. Ben tensed his muscles, coiled for action, but it wasn't the Dray, it was Mira. She emerged from the trees, her movements swift and silent. Ben's breath caught in his throat as he saw her. She was unheard, but there was a wild look in her eyes, one that told him the danger wasn't over yet. Mira, he hissed, rushing toward her. What are you doing? I told you to stay hidden. Mira gave him a brief, tense smile. I'm not going to hide. Then she said softly, the Drek are closing in, but I didn't want to leave you alone. You need me to guide you. We are in this together. Ben shook his head in disbelief. You shouldn't have come back, it's too dangerous. Mira's expression hardened. I couldn't let you face them alone, she said. We're heart, remember, that means we protect each other no matter what. Ben felt his chest tighten. Mira's words struck something deep inside him, something he hadn't expected. He had always believed in self-reliance, in survival at any cost. But now standing in front of him was someone who saw things differently, who would fight for him even if it meant risking everything. We are not out of danger yet, Mira continued, her voice calm but urgent. We need to keep moving. Ben nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. They couldn't stop now, they had to keep pushing forward together. They continued up the hill, the air growing colder. As they neared the cave, the forest thinned out more, revealing a rocky cliff face ahead. Ben could see the entrance to the cave now, just a small opening in the rock hidden by a tangle of vines and brush. It was the perfect place to hide if they could make it in time. But as they neared the entrance, Ben's blood ran cold. The unmistakable sound of footsteps reached his ears, multiple sets moving quickly through the trees. The Drek were close, too close. They had found them. Mira turned to Ben, her face set with determination. Go, she said, get inside. I'll hold them off. Ben's heart clenched in his chest. No, Mira, you can't. I can. She interrupted firmly. Trust me. Before he could argue further, Mira pushed him toward the cave entrance. Go now. Ben hesitated for only a moment before turning and running toward the cave. His legs carried him faster than he thought possible, but every step felt like a weight on his chest. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. Mira was giving him a chance to survive, but at what cost? As he reached the cave, Ben glanced over his shoulder. He saw Mira standing at the edge of the trees, her stance ready for whatever was coming. The sound of the Dray's footsteps grew louder, and Ben's heart raced. He didn't know if she would make it, but he had to believe she would. With one final glance, Ben ducked into the darkness of the cave. The cool air inside was a relief, but it didn't calm his racing heart. Mira had bought him time, but for how long? Then pressed his back against the cold, jagged walls of the cave, his breath coming in quick, shallow gas. The dark interior was a stark contrast to the chaos of the forest outside. For a moment he allowed himself to rest, his mind racing with thoughts of Mira. He could still hear the sound of her voice telling him to go, to survive. But now that he was here alone in the cave, the silence was deafening. He clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. Why did she have to stay behind? He knew the Drek were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had found her, and yet Mira had refused to leave him behind. She had given him a chance. He couldn't let it go to waste. As his eyes adjusted to the Darkness. Ben noticed something strange. The cave was unlike any he had seen before. It wasn't just a simple hiding spot, it felt ancient. The walls were covered with markings, strange symbols carved into the stone, and glowing faintly with a soft blue light. It wasn't the glow of a simple fungus or moss, it was something more, something that hummed with a power that made Ben feel uneasy. He moved closer to the markings, running his fingers lightly over the cool stone. The symbols were unlike any language he recognized, but there was something familiar about them, as if they were calling to him. The faint glow intensified as his fingers brushed against the rock, and for a moment he felt a strange warmth fill the air. It was as if the cave was alive, aware of his presence. Ben pulled his hand away, his heart racing. What is this place? He wondered. The markings didn't seem to belong to any known civilization. They were too old, too complex. The cave felt like it had been waiting for something or someone. Suddenly a distant sound shattered his thoughts. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder as the minutes passed. Footsteps, and then the unmistakable growl of the dray, their guttural voices cutting through the stillness. Ben's blood ran cold. They had found the cave. The Drek were closing in. Ben scrambled for cover, hiding behind a